Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. Who am I? I'm Andrew Sumner. That's it. I'm Andrew Sumner, and this is Chip Zdarsky. How are you, Chip?
I'm good. I'm CHIP ZDARSKY.
Yeah, right on. What is there to feel bad about?
Sure.
We're,
Yeah.
well, it's appropriate that we're here to talk about your creator-owned book, um, written and illustrated by yourself, public domain.
Yeah.
Such an interesting concept. How can you set it up for the viewers at home?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's about a family where the father back in the 70s created a character named the Domain. Um, uh, he was the artist on the book, co-creator, and now decades later, it's the most popular character in the world. Like spawned many movies. And he lives a very modest life because, like most comic creators, he hasn't known that. And so he's got two sons, Miles and Dave, and they both have very different takes on it. Miles is angry that his father hasn't received his financial due, and Dave is just like, well, Dad's brought joy to so many people, and he's content. Like, why bring this up at this point? And so it's about that kind of that conflict in the family and the conflict with the company. So clearly it's based it's based on the industry that we know and love. But they're not specific people within the industry. It's just kind of like a broad um, uh, piece where I'm pulling from different kind of historical things and making a bunch of stuff up as I go.
And Chip, is it designed to be, say, 5 or 6 issues at the beginning, a middle, and an end? Is that the way you've conceived it?
No, I've actually conceived it as like an ongoing. Like there are plot points that kind of happen within the first 5 issues that kind of open the story up a bit more to be kind of like a slice of life family drama. Um, uh, the big restriction is basically on my time and my health and my body, whether or not I can keep doing it. I'm drawing it right now. You
Yeah.
can't. Oh, there's my
Yeah,
pen.
there you
It's like
go. Yeah.
off to the side. I'm constantly working on it, and it's a joy to do, but also it's a lot because I am writing, drawing, coloring, lettering, designing it. Like it's yeah, maybe not the smartest move I've ever made at this point in my career, but but uh, but working on something like this, especially being able to draw again, is kind of keeping me a little sane.
Yeah, I can understand the therapy element of that. It is a
Yeah,
fascinating choice, though, given how massively productive you are at the moment with these big name characters for these big name
yeah.
companies. With all those commitments you've got and to do this at the same time, it's amazing.
I know, and it's like okay, yeah, sure. I'm working on Daredevil and Batman. Meanwhile, I'm making a comic that's critical of the
Yeah,
companies.
yeah,
Like
right.
maybe not the smartest move I've ever made, but it's like it's all public record. I'm not like pulling out any skeletons from the closet. Like everyone knows some of the behavior of companies and creators over the years. Um, but yeah, it just felt like an important thing to do, and to be able to tell a story too that's not rooted in the fantastical and superheroes or vampires or any of the other kind of books I'm doing. Um, yeah, felt nice to do something that felt a bit more grounded.
Yeah, and it is indeed a very rich subject, and it's something that comes into focus more and more every day, given
Yeah,
the massive power of these IPs created under these onerous like contracts, which now fund the international entertainment business and just make so much money that it's just interesting, the microscope it places on their creation.
yeah, it's weird, and like I feel like within 10-15 years that kind of discussion is going to disappear a bit because I think as the stuff like the MCU or eventually the DCU uh, um, as they progress, they're going to start kind of making stories based on the stories that they're telling within the movies and TV shows, and not as
Yeah.
much pulling from the comics because they really, it's like mining. Like, they've mined a lot. The recent Thor movie, Jason, Russell, Assad,
Yeah,
they pulled so much from that, and that's not that long ago that storyline happened. And same with like Ms. Marvel, like hitting the screen, like was that 10 years ago
yeah,
that these
bang on.
characters premiered? So they've caught up to the comics. So I'd be interested to see um, whether or not the comics feel as necessary to that process as they have previously in the next 10, 20 years.
I think that's a very perceptive way of looking at it, and I'm certain personally that you're right, and that's the way it's going, because they've taken that sort of approach of, it's like with comedians, stand-up comedians who say, you spend 5 years honing a particular piece of material, and then you might tour it for 2 years, but the minute you've got your HBO special or whatever, that's it, it's done. It's gone, it's out
Yeah.
there. And Marvel and DC are kind of in that, I mean, post Endgame, Marvel particularly really went for broke with what they adapted, and it worked beautifully
Hmm.
well. We can't do it again.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But also, like, not to get too far into it, but um, uh, Sarah and Bendis creating Miles Morales, um, that character creation justifies probably Marvel's entire output for several years. Like the amount of money Marvel spent to make comics for several years, to get just one Miles Morales, who is now like, his own kind of franchise is going to be popping up everywhere, and there's like movies and sequels, and I'm sure he's going to be in the MCU at some point, and on every lunchbox. Like that justifies the comics weirdly.
Yeah,
Like all the comics that are made, like you take a bunch of shots, and like if one hits, it's huge. It's huge for these
yeah,
companies. So, I might think that like, oh, maybe comics won't be viewed as necessary to that process in 10 years, but all it takes is a writer and an artist to come up with the next thing within those
yeah.
pages, and all of a sudden, like the balance sheet looks a lot more balanced.
No, I again, it's. I think you're spot on, and
Yeah.
not all of the characters that have cut through on the comics to movies dynamic are lined up with Captain America and Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. It's like the
Mhm.
Miles is a great recent example. Wolverine,
Yeah.
not got a big legacy as a character. Kind of,
Hmm.
yeah, it's been around for a long time now, but doesn't exist before the '70s. And
Yeah.
again, huge, tremendously huge value from a franchise perspective,
Hmm.
from a business creation perspective. It's very interesting. I think it's fascinating
Yeah.
that you're getting the chance to play around with this and create a story. That's got to be a real kick.
Yeah. It's definitely made me kind of think more about these things, rethink a lot about it. I have a lot of friends who have had their stuff adapted for screen, and um, all with their own individual experiences. So yeah, working in public domain has definitely kind of brought a lot of things into focus for me as a comics creator. Um, and not just like a one-sided thing as well. Like it's not just like, oh, well, corporations are evil. I'm just like, yeah, I mean, um, the corporations as an entity, obviously just care about the bottom line, but also there's a lot of uh, uh, yeah, a lot of creators that maybe came along after the people who originally created that built those properties up that maybe don't get their due.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, there's a lot of angles to look at this from.
yeah. I think that's a very very common thing I notice all the time looking at the end credits on the various
Yeah,
big comic book company movies. Think, man, that storyline and there's that storyline and that storyline got nothing to do with the original DNA of the creation, right?
yeah, it's weird. I mean, as part of the beauty and like the headache of creating comics within this kind of broader continuity in this universe, like Winter Soldier is an amazing character, and I'm friends with Ed, and like that character wouldn't have been a thing if it wasn't for the popularity of Captain America and like the creation of Bucky Barnes, and like everyone that came before that kind of built up that title and built up those characters in the public consciousness to allow the emotional impact of bringing back Bucky and making him Winter Soldier. Like there's so much that leads up to that magic moment. Not to take any credit away from Ed, but because I think Ed deserves a fair amount of money for
I completely
what
agree.
Marvel's done.
But
But yeah,
you're
but
right.
so does everyone that's worked on them before. And so the problem is like the compensation at the point of creation. Because like you don't see a costume designer on a superhero movie being like, well, I created this, and like, why am I not getting money, years down the line? Because they're paid quite well for the thing that they're doing in the moment. So they understand like, oh yeah, I've created this costume, and like off it goes into the ether, and then I move on to my next project. But they're compensated quite fairly. Whereas there's a lot of cases at the comic companies where they're not, because the revenue from the comics isn't enough to justify paying them a lot. So it's weird. Like more money should be being put into the comics and paying the comic creators, even if they don't necessarily turn a huge profit or any profit at all, because this is the R&D for the stuff down the line.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all interesting to think about.
I couldn't agree more, and it's fascinating, and that sits as a layer above the basic sort of almost eternal questions now about, was Kirby fairly rewarded? No. Was Ditko
No.
fairly rewarded? No, absolutely no
No.
way. And
Yeah.
that doesn't feel. It's one thing if you date J.D. Salinger and your estate has made a fortune out of one fantastic novel, but for it to
Yeah.
be these guys and to have just provided so much entertainment to a century of people, reading and going to movies and whatnot, to receive
Yeah.
the level of remuneration they have, I think it's a very interesting thing for you to be examining, in a comic book. I love the kind of meta element of that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to keep it as unmeta as possible. Like I'm not going to show up. Like real comic creators aren't going to show up.
It's Grant Morrison turns up in the corner.
Yeah. I've gone down that road before, and you can only do that so many times. But yeah, to kind of create comic creators that are like amalgamations of people that I've met or known or history has known, definitely gives it a slight kind of meta-textual feel.
Wonderful, mate. I just can't wait to dig into it, and that is public domain. Issue 1 is available for order right now, and issue 2 onwards available for pre-order to the links attached to my conversation with recurring guest Chip ZDARSKY. It's great to see you, mate. You take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too, Andrew. Thanks.
Cheers. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.